to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to show you a game that had a very closed position. As we know in chess, there are two types of pawn structures. One that are blocked in and therefore create a so-called closed type of positions, and others when the pawns are mobile or they have open files. Today, as I said, we'll focus on a closed type of center. And then we'll look at a couple of examples of breakthroughs in pawn endgames. Let's see our first example, which is a game between the legendary grandmaster from Yugoslavia, Gligoric, versus Klein. This game started out as a King's Indian defense, which is one of the popular openings against White's queen-pawn start. White gets to occupy the center early on, and Black develops on the side first, fianchettoing his bishop, and hopes for counterplay later. Black got to castle already, and both sides are developing. Of course, this position has been reached thousands of times before. And here White plays rook e1, positions the rook on e1 to protect the pawn on e4 when and if that will be needed. As you can see, Black is playing rook e8, trying to put indirect pressure on that pawn, so an after trade on d4, White would need to worry about that. And that's the reason why the White bishop went back to its initial square, although with a major difference. The White king and rook traded positions from their starting positions pretty much, although the White king is not quite in the corner, but it's in its castled position. But the point is that the White rook got to a center file, has an important role in protecting the pawn on e4, and of course, even more importantly, the White king got to a safe place on g1 behind the three pawns f, g, and h. Again, this position has been reached in many games. In these situations, White has three possibilities. To try to keep the tension in the middle of the board, that is, between the d4 and e5 pawns, and continue developing and better the position little by little. The second choice would be to try to trade on e5, and that would of course determine the characteristic of the position differently. Or instead, to decide to close the position by playing d5. Now, for the rest of the game, the position has this type of pawn structure where the two pairs of middle pawns, d and e, are locked in. They will not have the opportunity to move. Let's see how the game continued. Black immediately chose a wrong positioning of his knight by putting it to f8. It's true that it opens up the diagonal of Black's bishop, but the knight on f8 does not have any potential. That knight would belong on a square like c5, which is a whole lot more active. Although the immediate knight c5 may have been not that good because of a possibility of White chasing it away by playing b4. White simply continued developing his bishop with bishop to d2, clearing the c1 square for the rook. Black continued by playing h6, clearing the h7 square for one of the pieces, and White played g3. This move has, I think, several goals. One of them is to reposition the bishop to g2, but also just to protect the h4 square, because many times this knight may want to go to h4 to prepare the opening the position with f4. However, moving the knight to h4 to an unprotected square may give black the opportunity to a discovery by capturing a pawn and then the knight. Therefore, white played g3 for the above explained reasons instead of knight h4. Black played king h7, again an interesting move. I'm not sure if it's the best. And white successfully played knight h4. Now the knight is on a safe square, so none of the discoveries, sacrifices by the black knight may work here. And black played knight g8, with the idea, a very typical one for such pawn structure and for the King's Indian defense, black is trying to play f7 to f5 to try to gain some activity. By the way, another important noticing is that by the current pawn structure that we have here right in the middle of the board, white has gained space advantage. By the white pawn on d5 being more towards black's territory than the other way around, it gives white some advantage. White, with his next move, playing queen to f3, the main goal is to prevent black playing f7 to f5. As we'll see, the reality is that the pawn on f7 is not in much of a danger, because black could afford to simply play c5 and close the center completely. It would be too greedy for white to capture the pawn on f7 in this position, because after the black knight returning to f6, it would be the white queen who would be in trouble finding an escape from the enemy's jungle. Let's return to the position after c5, and really this is the part of the game that I would like to focus on. Now the position is rather closed, with not a single piece exchanged so far, with not having a single open file at the moment. And that's exactly what white's goal should be, and to some degree black's, to try to open a file where each side's pieces could enter into the opponent's territory. That file, for white's perspective, may be the B file, which is extremely typical for such positions. And it's kind of interesting that the F file may be one that both sides may be interested in. Very typically, black is trying to prepare to play f7 to f5, and then either provoke a trade of pawns on f5, or black would try to gain space advantage and develop an attack by advancing that pawn to f4 and maybe even play g5 later. Interestingly, at times it's white who is trying to prepare playing f4 and advance similarly as black may try. In the meantime, in this game, white proceeded by playing a3, preparing the opening of the B file. Black responded by protecting the pawn on f7, and also for the future maybe to appear with that rook on the B file. White played b4. If black would trade those pawns on b4, that would only help white, because then white could try to advance the c pawn to c5. Also, the fact that the a file would then get half opened, white may get target in the a7 pawn also on that half open file. Black in this position continued with a very typical move, playing b6, preparing for that trade on the b file to recapture with the b pawn. And very natural move. White is in no rush to open the b file. White would like to choose the time, to choose the best moment, the right moment to open the b file after his pieces are as ideally positioned as possible. And white played rook a to b1. Black responded by moving the bishop to d7, and white felt that finally the time arrived to do the trade on c5. Now black has the option to recapture with either pawn. Black chose to capture with the b pawn. Capturing with the d pawn would result in different kind of problems. On one hand, white now has a protected passed pawn on d5, which black does not have a knight to quickly and easily block on d6. White could choose to play a4, a5, which is a very typical and good idea in this position, and still go for opening the b file. Another idea may be to advance the d pawn at the right moment and then clear the outpost on d5 for a white knight. Black instead, as I mentioned, chose to capture with the b pawn, and now the goal is clear: to double rooks on the b file and then enter into black's territory at the right moment. White also decided to bring the queen towards the queen's side to help those efforts. Black responded by playing bishop to e8, and the doubling started of the rooks. Black opposed white's rook on the b file, and white would like to have control of the b file, preferably without trading all of the rooks. White would need at least one of the rooks to enter into black's territory. Therefore, instead of trading, rather white plays rook eb1, doubling the rooks. Here, if black would trade rooks and then try to play queen c8, preparing rook to b7, the exchange of the second pair of rooks, it would be a bit too slow because white would get to play queen b1, and now we can understand why white played queen d3 a couple of moves ago, and now the b file is completely in white's control, and it will be white who can enter into black's territory. Let's go back to the position of the game. After rook eb1, black chose to live with a different problem by playing rook to b6. It's true that after this, the white rooks will not be able to enter into black's position easily. However, after the trade of rooks on b6, black will have to live with a serious weakness on b6, on a half-open file that white can target in the upcoming moves. White brought the queen even closer to the b file. Black played rook a7, hoping to counterattack against white's isolated pawn on the a file, but as we'll see, white's pawn is in a lot more security and safety than black's pawn. White responded by protecting the pawn on a3 and at the same time attacking the black pawn on b6. Black had to protect the pawn because if they don't, after white capturing the pawn on b6 and black trading queens and then capturing the pawn on a3, also the black pawn on d6 would be falling. Black responded by rook a6, protecting the pawn, and white played knight to b5. Putting pressure on the black pawn on d6, and the response was knight to e7. Trading on b5, the black bishop for a white knight, would not help either, because white, after recapturing either a queen or pawn, would maintain his advantage. And now an important moment. White played bishop to h3. This is a very important preventive move. It prevents black from playing f5 because black was about to do that. Also prevents the black knight from coming to c8, from where it would protect the pawn on d6. And also the trade after bishop d7, the trade of the light squared bishops clearly helps white. Because of the pawn structure, it's pretty much defined that these white pawns on c4, d5, and d4 are all on white squares, therefore limiting the white bishop, and potentially could be a target to black's light squared bishop. So white is more than happy to exchange those bishops and leave only dark squared bishops on the board, which obviously favors white. Now white felt that allowing black's f5 is no longer a big problem, and therefore moved the knight back, aiming to go towards the other side of the board. Black responded by knight c8, and knight e3 came, and black played h5. And knight d1. White is focusing fully on the queen side of the board. Came bishop to f6. After f5, white would simply react with f3, and black would not have enough for a serious attack. After knight d1 came bishop to f6, king g2, a very important preventive move, not allowing the black queen to come to h3, just in case. Black played king g7, knight e3, knight h7. Finally, that knight from f8 is trying to be useful, got to g5, but white does not allow that, plays h4, king g8. Black does not have many active moves or plans here. And after some maneuvering in the last moves, a new phase of the game starts. This is what Ove, former world champion, wrote about this game in this position, about the previous moves. Here is what Ove said. After some harmless shuffling, white hits on the right plan. The following breakthrough aims to get the B file fully open so that his pieces can penetrate into enemy lines. Let's see what he meant. White played a4. Black made another waiting move. And finally, the knight retreated to c3, with the idea to play perhaps queen b5 at the right moment. And black played knight a7, preventing that. And this was a key moment where white broke through. White played a5. If black captures the pawn either way, white would immediately increase the advantage significantly. But anyway, let's see what would happen. After rook takes pawn, queen would take on b6, attacking the rook, rook a3, and the rook would get into trouble. Rook seems to be trapped, although for a moment black can save that by playing knight c8. White would play queen c6. Both the queen and the rook are under attack. After queen trades and rook retreat, white would have a pretty much unstoppable pass pawn after c7, followed by rook b8. Let's go back again to the position where white played a5, And let's see what would happen if, on the other hand, black would capture the pawn with his pawn on b6. Then the white queen would get to b8, check, and followed by coming in with the rook to b7. After queen d8, not rook c7, which looks good, attacking the pinned piece because of then rook e8, but much better is knight b5 first. Now this move would be threatening already with both rook c7 and also knight c7, trapping the rook. Black does not have sufficient defense against both of those. Let's go back to the game one more time and let's see how that game concluded. Black here did not capture the pawn with either piece but moved the knight back to c8, when white response was putting pressure on that b6 pawn a third time. Now black had no choice but to capture, and now queen b5. Both the black queen and rook are under attack. Black traded. And finally, white has a very dangerous passed pawn that keeps advancing. Now, after rook b7, knight c4, the a5 pawn would be captured with the knight, which chases then the rook out of b7, and then the b6 pawn would be pretty much unstoppable. In the actual game, black instead sacrificed the knight immediately on b6, which pretty much equals resignation, as after rook b6, few more moves, and black actually resigned. After a few attacking moves, black no longer could hang on to the d6 pawn, and this was the end of the game. A very instructive game on a typical close type of position from the King's Indian defense. Let's switch topics for a moment and let's talk about breakthroughs in pawn endgames. The following one is perhaps one of the most famous breakthroughs of all times, which has been actually discovered by Cosio back in 1766. We may have seen a similar position already in one of the previous lessons, and we know that in order to break through, white on one hand needs to hurry up before the black king gets to f5 and will be safe. And also the fact that the middle pawn is the one that we need to push. And then depending how black captures, we push the other pawn, creating a passed pawn and a win for white. Let's see a bit less known position on a similar theme. In this position, there are four pawns on each side, not three as in the previous example, and the structure, the positioning of the pawns is also different than in the last example. Yet, here also white is able to break through. One important thing to remember about such and similar breakthroughs is that the side whose pawns are more advanced, that is, are closer to the promotion square, are in advantage. Here, white should continue by playing f5, and black can try to run with the king to catch those pawns, but it's coming too late. Now white can choose between two ways to win, either pushing further the f pawn or the more elegant way, pushing the g pawn. Now if the black king simply continues, white would just play f6, threatening to capture black's pawn, and if black trades, then of course not recapturing on f6 with the g pawn, but either moving forward to g6 or simply capturing on h6, and it's visible that the white pawns are further advanced than black's counterpart, and white will be the one who arrives first. If after f5 and king b4 and g5, black captures the f5 pawn, then white wins just by one tempo. If the black king would be on c5, the king would catch that e-pawn, but not here. After g6, pawn takes, e6. Again, the white e-pawn is unstoppable, and it's irrelevant that black will have 4 pawns versus white's only 1, because after the pawn promotes and becomes a queen, the white queen can quickly capture all of the black pawns, and none of them will reach ever the promotion square. Let's move on to the next position, where each side actually has 5 pawns. The position we see on the board right now, at first it seems that it's black who's in trouble. It is black who is in Zugzwang. As we know, Zugzwang means that one side needs to move and therefore worsen his or her position. It looks as if in this position, if black moves his king, he'll lose the d5 pawn, or if he pushes either the f or the h pawn, those would be captured and black would lose. However, that's not the case. In this game, which by the way has been played in a real game back in 1941, black played f4 and white resigned. White realized that if he takes the pawn with the g pawn, black can push the h pawn and then create a passed pawn after h3 and win. Or if he captures with the e pawn, black would sacrifice 2 more pawns and create a passed pawn on the e file. Also, it would be too slow for white to run back with the king, because black would advance the f pawn further, and after the trade of pawns, the white king would arrive too late when black creates a passed pawn on the f file. A very nice example of breakthrough. And last but not least, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. This is again a very famous, very old position composed by Stama in 1792. As usual, sit back, wait, and try to figure out the solution yourself. White can force checkmate in 8 moves. Good luck. Here is the solution. White captures with a discovery check, knight takes b5. Hey, but the rook is hanging on e7. What to do now? Well, it was all planned, don't worry. Rook a7, king b8, and white just keeps giving checks. Now black has no choice but block the check. We have to act with forceful moves, with checks all along. Rook a8, king d7, rook d8, king e6, rook d6, and finally the king arrived to its final destination on f5, and we're ready to checkmate. Gorgeous. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you remember some ideas on how to open files, how to maneuver in closed positions, and of course how to break through, if you can, in pawn endgames. Thank you for listening, and so long.